The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Raven's Hollow Palace as Princess Elena hurried through the East Wing corridors. Her emerald silk dress rustled against the ornate walls lined with portraits of generations past. She clutched a leather-bound journal tightly to her chest, its contents holding secrets that could shake the very foundation of the kingdom. Elena had always been different from the other members of the royal family. While they concerned themselves with ceremonies and appearances, she spent her time in the palace library, studying ancient texts and learning about the common people's struggles. Her marriage to Prince Alexander 3 years ago had been arranged, but what started as duty had blossomed into genuine love and mutual respect. The palace had been unusually tense for weeks. Queen Isabella, Alexander's stepmother, had been making increasingly bold moves to consolidate power since King Frederick's health began declining. The 60-year-old queen, with her sharp features and calculating eyes, had never fully accepted Elena into the family. She saw the young princess as a threat to her own influence and had been working tirelessly to undermine her position. Elena reached the private study where Alexander waited. Her husband stood by the tall windows overlooking the palace gardens, his broad shoulders tense beneath his navy military uniform. At 32, Alexander possessed the kind of quiet strength that commanded respect without demanding it. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, suggesting he had been running his hands through it, a habit he displayed when deeply troubled. "You received my message," Elena said softly, closing the heavy oak door behind her. Alexander turned, his steel-gray eyes immediately finding hers. "What you've discovered." "Elena, this could destroy everything we've worked for." Elena opened her journal, revealing pages of careful notes and copied documents. "The financial records don't lie, Alexander. Isabella has been redirecting funds meant for the children's hospitals and schools. Millions have disappeared into accounts connected to her family's private investments." The evidence was damning. Elena had spent months carefully tracking the inconsistencies she'd noticed in the royal budget reports. What began as curiosity about delayed construction projects had evolved into the discovery of systematic corruption. Isabella wasn't just stealing from the royal treasury. She was stealing from the kingdom's most vulnerable citizens. Alexander moved closer, studying the documents over Elena's shoulder. His jaw tightened as he read the figures. The new wing of St. Margaret's Children's Hospital, the rural school construction project, all of it diverted. "There's more," Elena continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I found correspondence suggesting she's been providing sensitive information to Lord Blackwood's mining consortium. They've been buying land from farmers at far below market value, knowing in advance which areas would be designated for development. The implications were staggering. Lord Blackwood was known for his ruthless business practices and had long sought to expand his industrial empire into the kingdom's pristine countryside. If Isabella was indeed his informant, she was betraying not just the royal family, but the entire nation. Alexander stepped away, pacing to his desk where maps of the kingdom lay scattered. "We suspected she was involved in something, but this..." He gestured toward the evidence. "This is treason. She knows I've been investigating," Elena said. "Yesterday, I found someone had been through my private chambers. Nothing was taken, but papers were moved. Books I'd left open were closed. The threat was real and immediate." Isabella commanded significant loyalty among certain palace staff and military officials. Her years of careful relationship building had created a network of allies who viewed her as the rightful power behind the throne. Elena, despite her genuine care for the people and Alexander's unwavering support, was still seen by some as an outsider. Alexander returned to Elena's side, taking her hands in his. "We need to be extremely careful how we proceed. Isabella has connections throughout the palace. If we move too quickly or trust the wrong people..." "I know," Elena replied. "But we can't let this continue. Every day she delays these projects, children suffer. Families lose their homes. The trust between the crown and the people erodes further." The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor made them both freeze. Alexander quickly moved to his desk, shuffling through official documents as if conducting routine business. Elena closed her journal and stepped toward the bookshelf, pretending to search for a volume. The footsteps passed without stopping, but the brief interruption reminded them both of their precarious position. They were walking a tightrope, trying to expose corruption while surrounded by potential enemies. "There's something else," Elena said once she was certain they were alone again. "I think she's planning something for the Harvest Festival next week." The Harvest Festival was the kingdom's most important celebration, drawing visitors from neighboring realms and providing an opportunity for the royal family to demonstrate their connection to the people. It was also when major announcements were traditionally made. What kind of something? Alexander asked. I overheard her speaking with her private secretary about timing and public perception. She mentioned that certain revelations about the royal family's finances would be particularly effective during the festival when media attention is at its highest. Elena's words sent a chill through Alexander. Isabella was planning to turn their investigation against them. By controlling the narrative and timing of any revelations, she could paint Elena as the source of financial impropriety while positioning herself as the one who discovered and reported the corruption. She's going to frame you, Alexander said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. It appears so. She has access to financial records and can manipulate them to suggest I've been the one redirecting funds. With my background in economic studies and my access to budget information, it would be believable. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Isabella could present herself as the loyal stepmother who reluctantly discovered her daughter-in-law's betrayal. The evidence against Elena would be fabricated but convincing, while the real proof of Isabella's crimes would disappear. Alexander walked to his private safe, hidden behind a portrait of his grandfather. From it, he withdrew a small silver key. There's something I need to show you. He led Elena to a section of the bookshelf that looked identical to the rest, but concealed a hidden mechanism. The key unlocked a small compartment containing several documents. I've been conducting my own investigation, Alexander explained. Not into the financial irregularities. I trust your work completely on that front. But into Isabella's personal communications and activities. Elena examined the papers Alexander handed her. They contained copies of letters, meeting schedules, and travel records that painted a picture of Isabella's extensive secret network. She's been much busier than we realized, Alexander continued. These documents show regular communications with foreign dignitaries, particularly from the neighboring kingdom of Valdris. There are also financial transactions that don't appear in any official records. Valdris had long harbored ambitions to expand its territory and influence. The kingdom's ruler, King Marcus, was known for his aggressive diplomacy and willingness to exploit internal conflicts in neighboring realms. You think she's working with Valdris? Elena asked. I think she's positioning herself to maintain power regardless of what happens to our kingdom. If she can weaken father's rule and create instability, Valdris might see an opportunity for intervention. Isabella could emerge as a collaborative leader in any new arrangement. The scope of Isabella's betrayal was becoming clear. This wasn't simply about personal enrichment or family politics. She was potentially compromising the entire kingdom's sovereignty for her own gain. Elena felt a wave of anger and determination wash over her. She had entered royal life hoping to make a positive difference, to bridge the gap between the crown and the common people. Isabella's actions threatened not just Elena's reputation, but the welfare of every citizen in the kingdom. We have to stop her, Elena said firmly. But we need allies. People we can trust completely. Alexander nodded. I've been thinking the same thing. Captain Morrison in the Royal Guard. He's loyal to the crown, not to individual family members. And Lady Catherine has always been skeptical of Isabella's influence. Lady Catherine was the kingdom's chief advisor on social affairs, and had worked closely with Elena on various charitable initiatives. Her family had served the crown for generations, and her integrity was unquestioned. What about your father? Elena asked carefully. Alexander's expression grew pained. Father's health has been declining faster than we've acknowledged publicly. The doctors aren't optimistic about his recovery. Isabella knows this, and it's part of why she's moving so aggressively now. The timing of Isabella's scheme was no coincidence. With the king's health failing and succession questions looming, she was positioning herself to claim regency or significant influence over any transition of power. She's counting on father being too weak to intervene when her accusations surface, Alexander continued. And she knows that in the chaos following such revelations, normal procedures and protections might be overlooked. Elena understood the gravity of their situation. They had perhaps a week to gather irrefutable evidence and trusted allies before Isabella's plan came to fruition. The stakes couldn't be higher, not just for their marriage and Elena's reputation, but for the future of the entire kingdom. Then, we start tonight, Elena said decisively. We document everything we have, secure copies with trusted allies, and begin building our own network of support. Alexander smiled at his wife's determination. It was one of the qualities that had drawn him to her, even before love had developed between them. Elena never backed down from what was right, regardless of the personal cost. "There's one more thing," Alexander said. "Isabella has been hosting private dinners with several military commanders and regional governors. Captain Morrison mentioned it during our last security briefing. This was perhaps the most alarming development yet. If Isabella was cultivating military support, she might be planning more than just political maneuvering. The possibility of actual resistance to legitimate royal authority couldn't be ignored." As evening approached and shadows lengthened across the palace, Elena and Alexander began the dangerous work of preparing their counterattack. They would need to move carefully and quietly, building their case while avoiding Isabella's surveillance network. The first phase would involve securing the evidence Elena had already gathered and making copies that could be hidden in multiple locations. They would also need to begin reaching out to potential allies, testing loyalties without revealing too much too soon. Outside their study window, the palace grounds bustled with preparations for the upcoming harvest festival. Servants hung banners and arranged decorative elements that would soon provide the backdrop for Isabella's anticipated betrayal. But Elena and Alexander were no longer the naive targets Isabella believed them to be. They had seen through her schemes and were prepared to fight back. The question now was whether they could move quickly enough to expose the truth before Isabella's carefully orchestrated plan destroyed everything they held dear. The battle for the kingdom's future was about to begin, and its first shots would be fired not on any battlefield, but within the ornate walls of Raven's Hollow Palace itself. The clock tower chimed midnight as Princess Elena made her way through the palace's forgotten servant corridors. These narrow passages, once used by staff to move unseen throughout the building, had become her secret highway for investigating Isabella's activities. Tonight, she carried a small leather satchel containing copying materials and a miniature camera designed to look like a jewelry box, a gift from Captain Morrison, who had procured it from military intelligence. 3 days had passed since her initial conversation with Alexander, and they had made significant progress in building their case. However, each new piece of evidence they uncovered revealed the depth of Isabella's corruption and the sophistication of her network. Elena paused at a junction in the passageway, consulting a hand-drawn map she had created during weeks of exploration. The route to Isabella's private office would require her to pass through 3 different wings of the palace, avoiding guard stations and the areas where Isabella's loyal servants maintained their watch. The risk was enormous. If caught, Elena would have no reasonable explanation for her presence in Isabella's quarters at such an hour. But the potential reward was even greater. Isabella kept certain documents in a private safe that wasn't connected to the main palace security system. Earlier that evening, Elena had attended a formal dinner in honor of visiting dignitaries from the Kingdom of Meridia. Isabella had been the perfect hostess, charming the foreign guests while subtly undermining Elena's contributions to the conversation. It was a masterful display of the political skills that had made Isabella so dangerous. During the dinner, Elena had observed something troubling. Isabella had exchanged meaningful glances with Lord Blackwood, who was seated at the far end of the table. When Isabella excused herself briefly between courses, Elena noticed that Blackwood also left the dining hall. They returned separately, but both bore expressions of satisfaction that suggested their brief absence had been productive. More concerning was the presence of General Aldrich among the dinner guests. The gruff military commander had served the kingdom for 30 years, but his loyalty had always been to strength rather than principle. His attendance at what should have been a purely diplomatic gathering suggested Isabella was continuing to cultivate military support. Elena reached Isabella's office wing and carefully examined the hallway through a concealed observation point. The corridor appeared empty, but she knew that Isabella employed private security beyond the official palace guard. These men, ostensibly hired for her personal protection, functioned more like a private intelligence service. Moving silently across the marble floor, Elena reached the office door. Alexander had provided her with a set of lockpicks and basic training in their use, skills he had learned during his military service. The lock was more complex than those she had practiced on, but after several tense minutes, she heard the satisfying click of success. Isabella's office reflected her personality perfectly. Everything was precisely arranged, from the antique furniture to the carefully selected artwork. The space projected authority and sophistication while concealing its occupant's true nature. Elena knew she had perhaps 20 minutes before Isabella's usual late-night security check. The private safe was hidden behind a portrait of Queen Victoria, Isabella's claimed inspiration for royal leadership. Elena had learned the combination through careful observation of Isabella's habits, and, a stroke of luck, the numbers corresponded to significant dates in Isabella's rise to power within the royal family. Inside the safe, Elena found exactly what she had hoped to discover: financial records that contradicted the official palace accounts, correspondence with Lord Blackwood detailing their arrangement, and, most damaging of all, communications with King Marcus of Valdres. The letters from Valdres were written in coded language, but their meaning was clear to anyone familiar with diplomatic communications. King Marcus was offering Isabella significant support in exchange for favorable treatment regarding territorial disputes and trade agreements. The timeline suggested these negotiations had been ongoing for over a year. Elena photographed each document quickly but carefully, ensuring the images would be clear enough to serve as evidence. As she worked, she became increasingly aware of the scope of Isabella's treachery. This wasn't merely corruption or even treason. It was the systematic dismantling of the kingdom's sovereignty. A sound in the corridor made Elena freeze. Footsteps were approaching, accompanied by low conversation. She quickly returned the documents to their exact positions and closed the safe, but the voices were getting closer. There was no time to reach the door without being seen. Elena slipped behind the heavy curtains that covered the office's tall windows. The thick fabric would conceal her completely, but she would be trapped if the visitors decided to conduct a thorough search of the room. The office door opened, and Isabella's voice filled the space. "The timing must be perfect, Lord Blackwood. Any deviation from our schedule could undermine everything we've worked toward." "I understand completely, Your Majesty," came Blackwood's oily reply. Elena noted his use of the royal title. Isabella was already being addressed as if she were the reigning monarch. "General Aldrich assures me that his men will be positioned appropriately during the festival," Isabella continued. "When the accusations against Elena surface, we need to be prepared for any resistance from Alexander." Elena's blood ran cold. They weren't just planning to frame her. They were preparing for the possibility of armed conflict within the palace itself. "What about King Frederick?" Blackwood asked. "His condition remains unpredictable. Father-in-law's health continues to decline," Isabella said with chilling casualness. "The doctors have given him weeks, perhaps days. His death will actually simplify our timeline considerably." Elena gripped the curtain fabric to steady herself. Isabella was discussing the king's impending death as if it were a convenient business development. The callousness was breathtaking, even for someone Elena knew to be ruthless. "And if Prince Alexander refuses to cooperate with the new arrangements?" Blackwood pressed. "Alexander will have little choice once Elena is discredited and removed. He may harbor resentments, but he's fundamentally loyal to the crown. With proper guidance, he can be managed." Isabella's confidence was terrifying. She had clearly planned for every contingency, including the possibility that Alexander might resist her takeover. Elena realized that her husband was in far greater danger than either of them had understood. "The Valdres delegation arrives tomorrow," Isabella continued. "King Marcus's representatives will be positioned to offer immediate support once our transition begins. The neighboring kingdoms must see that we have powerful allies." Elena now understood the true purpose of the upcoming harvest festival. It wasn't just an opportunity to publicly destroy Elena's reputation. It was the launching point for Isabella's complete seizure of power, backed by foreign military support if necessary. "One final matter," Blackwood said. "Captain Morrison has been asking questions about financial irregularities. His investigation appears to be independent of any official inquiry." Elena's heart sank. Captain Morrison was one of their most trusted allies, but if Isabella knew about his activities, he was in immediate danger. "Morrison is a problem that can be solved," Isabella said coldly. "Arrange for him to discover evidence of Elena's supposed crimes. Make it appear that his investigation led him to her guilt. Then, unfortunately, he may suffer an accident before he can testify publicly." The casual way Isabella discussed murdering a loyal officer of the crown revealed the true depths of her evil. This wasn't just about power or money. Isabella was willing to kill anyone who stood in her way. "Excellent," Blackwood replied. "I'll have the false evidence planted in Morrison's quarters tonight. The accident can be arranged for tomorrow evening, after he's had time to discover the materials." Elena knew she had to warn Morrison immediately, but she was trapped until Isabella and Blackwood finished their meeting. Every minute of delay increased the danger to a man whose only crime was loyalty to the rightful monarchy. "There's one more development we should discuss," Isabella said. Elena has been conducting her own investigation into our activities. My sources indicate she's gathered some concerning information. How concerning? Blackwood asked. Potentially devastating if she's allowed to present it publicly. However, once she's discredited and arrested, any evidence she might offer will be dismissed as the desperate lies of a guilty woman. And if she attempts to reveal what she knows before the festival, that's why we're accelerating our timeline. Elena will be arrested tomorrow night on charges of embezzlement and treason. The evidence will be overwhelming, and Alexander will be powerless to intervene. Elena's hands trembled as she absorbed the implications. Isabella wasn't waiting for the festival. She was moving immediately. That gave Elena and Alexander less than 24 hours to execute their counterplan. What charges specifically? Blackwood inquired. Elena will be accused of redirecting hospital and school funding to personal accounts. We have bank records showing large deposits made under her name, along with correspondence suggesting she was selling royal secrets to foreign bidders. The sophistication of Isabella's frame-up was impressive and terrifying. She had created a complete false narrative supported by fabricated evidence that would be difficult to disprove under normal circumstances. The beauty of the plan, Isabella continued, is that Elena's legitimate investigation into financial irregularities actually supports our narrative. She had access to all the systems and information necessary to commit these crimes. Her own curiosity provides the perfect cover story for her guilt. Elena realized that Isabella had been watching her investigation from the beginning, allowing her to gather real evidence, while simultaneously preparing to use Elena's access and knowledge against her. After another 10 minutes of detailed planning, Isabella and Blackwood finally left the office. Elena waited several more minutes to ensure they were truly gone before emerging from her hiding place. Her entire body was shaking, both from fear and rage. The situation was far worse than she had imagined. Isabella wasn't just corrupt, she was orchestrating a complete coup with foreign backing, and she was prepared to kill anyone who stood in her way. Elena had to reach Alexander and Captain Morrison immediately. Using the servant passages again, Elena made her way quickly toward Alexander's quarters. The palace felt different now, as if she could sense the invisible networks of conspiracy and betrayal that Isabella had woven throughout its halls. She found Alexander in his private study, examining maps with Captain Morrison. Both men looked up as she entered, and their expressions immediately shifted to alarm when they saw her face. "Elena, what happened?" Alexander asked, rising from his chair. "They're moving tomorrow night," Elena said breathlessly. "Isabella plans to have me arrested on fabricated charges of embezzlement and treason. Captain Morrison, they know about your investigation, and they're planning to kill you after planting false evidence in your quarters." The two men exchanged grim looks. Morrison's weathered face showed no surprise, only resignation. "I suspected something like this might happen," he said. "I've been too visible with my inquiries." "There's more," Elena continued, and related everything she had overheard in Isabella's office. By the time she finished, both Alexander and Morrison looked genuinely shaken. "Foreign military support," Alexander muttered. "She's not just stealing from us. She's selling us out completely." "We have to act tonight," Morrison said. "If they're planting evidence in my quarters, we need to be there when they do it. We might be able to capture their agents in the act." Alexander nodded, but then turned to Elena with concern in his eyes. "And you can't stay in the palace. If they're planning to arrest you tomorrow night, you need to be somewhere safe where they can't reach you." "I'm not leaving," Elena said firmly. "We're in this together, and we're going to see it through together." "Elena, please be reasonable. If Isabella has you arrested, everything we've worked for will be for nothing. If I run now, it confirms her narrative. The innocent don't flee in the night. Besides, we have evidence that can expose her crimes. We just need the right opportunity to present it." Morrison stepped forward. "Actually, Princess Elena might be right. If she disappears now, Isabella can claim it's proof of guilt. But if we can stage a dramatic revelation during the festival, with Elena present to defend herself, we might be able to turn Isabella's own plan against her." Alexander looked unconvinced, but Elena could see him considering the possibility. "It would be incredibly dangerous," he said. "Everything we're doing is dangerous," Elena replied. "But this is our best chance to expose the truth and save the kingdom." As the three conspirators planned their counterattack against Isabella's treachery, none of them noticed the small figure watching from the shadows outside Alexander's study window. A servant loyal to Isabella had been positioned to monitor the prince's activities, and Everything they had discussed was about to be reported to their enemy. The final battle for control of the kingdom was about to begin, and Isabella's forces had just gained a crucial advantage in the opening moves of what would become a deadly game of political chess. Dawn broke gray and ominous over Ravenshollow Palace as Princess Elena stood before her bedroom mirror, preparing for what might be her final day of freedom. The events of the previous night had set in motion a series of confrontations that would determine not only her fate, but the future of the entire kingdom. She chose her clothing carefully, a deep blue dress that conveyed both dignity and strength, paired with the sapphire necklace that had belonged to Alexander's mother, the beloved former queen. The morning brought disturbing news. Captain Morrison had indeed discovered planted evidence in his quarters during the night, but their plan to catch Isabella's agents in the act had failed. The materials were sophisticated forgeries suggesting Elena's involvement in financial crimes, but Morrison had been prepared and immediately secured the false evidence without alerting those who had placed it. Alexander knocked softly on Elena's door before entering. His face showed the strain of a sleepless night spent coordinating with loyal palace staff and trusted military officers. "We've had a development," he said quietly. "Father is awake and asking to see us both." King Frederick's sudden alertness was unexpected. For weeks, he had drifted in and out of consciousness, weakened by an illness that palace physicians struggled to understand. Elena wondered if Isabella had been hastening the king's decline through subtle means, though she had no proof of such a heinous crime. They made their way to the king's private chambers, passing through hallways that felt charged with tension. Palace staff moved quietly about their duties, but Elena noticed the nervous glances and whispered conversations that suggested word of political upheaval was spreading. King Frederick sat propped against pillows in his massive four-poster bed, looking frail but alert. At 68, he had ruled for over 30 years with wisdom and compassion, earning genuine love from his people. His gray eyes, so similar to Alexander's, focused intently on Elena as she and Alexander approached. "My dear daughter," the king said, his voice weak but clear. "I know what Isabella is planning." Elena felt a surge of hope mixed with concern. If the king was aware of Isabella's treachery, he could stop it with a single command. But his physical condition remained precarious, and Isabella's network might find ways to circumvent royal orders. "Father, we have evidence of her crimes," Alexander said, moving to the king's bedside. "Financial corruption, treason, conspiracy with foreign powers. We can stop her before she does more damage." King Frederick nodded slowly. "I have suspected for months that Isabella was not the loyal stepdaughter she pretended to be, but I underestimated the scope of her ambitions." He gestured for Elena to come closer. "My child, you are in great danger. Isabella sees you as the greatest threat to her plans." "Because I discovered her financial crimes?" Elena asked. "Partly, but there's more. You represent everything she despises: genuine service to the people, moral integrity, and, most importantly, Alexander's unwavering love and loyalty. She knows that as long as you stand beside my son, her influence over him will be limited." The king's words confirmed Elena's worst fears about Isabella's motivations. This wasn't just about power or money. It was personal hatred masked as political necessity. "What can we do?" Alexander asked. "Isabella has supporters throughout the palace and military. If we move against her directly, we risk civil conflict." King Frederick was quiet for a long moment, gathering his strength. "There is something Isabella doesn't know," he finally said. 3 months ago, when my health began declining rapidly, I became suspicious about the sudden onset of my illness. I had my personal physician conduct private tests." Elena and Alexander exchanged alarmed glances. The implication was clear, but almost too terrible to accept. "The tests revealed traces of a slow-acting poison in my system," the king continued. "Nothing immediately lethal, but designed to gradually weaken my constitution and mental faculties. Isabella has been systematically murdering me." The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. Isabella wasn't just stealing money or planning political coups. She was a calculating murderess who had been slowly killing her own husband's father. "Father, why didn't you tell us immediately?" Alexander asked, his voice thick with emotion and anger. "Because I needed to be certain, and because direct accusations would have forced Isabella to accelerate her timeline. I've been pretending to be more incapacitated than I actually am, allowing her to believe her plan was working while I gathered my own evidence." King Frederick reached beneath his pillows and withdrew a sealed document. This contains the complete laboratory analysis of the poison, along with evidence of Isabella's access to the substances involved. It also includes my formal accusation of attempted regicide and my orders for her immediate arrest. Elena felt a wave of relief wash over her. With the king's direct intervention and documented evidence of attempted murder, Isabella's other crimes would crumble. But her relief was short-lived as she considered the dangers that still lay ahead. Isabella has foreign backing and military support, Elena warned. She won't surrender quietly, and she's prepared for armed resistance. I know, the king replied, which is why we must act with both speed and cunning. If we simply announce her crimes publicly, her supporters might react with violence. We need to isolate her from her power base before making any accusations. Alexander moved to the window, studying the palace grounds where preparations for the harvest festival continued. The festival could work in our favor, he mused. All of Isabella's key supporters will be in attendance, along with the foreign delegations she's been courting. If we can expose her crimes during the ceremony, with all the witnesses present, it would be incredibly risky, Elena said. If something goes wrong, we could trigger exactly the kind of violence we're trying to avoid. King Frederick struggled to sit up straighter. Sometimes risk is necessary to preserve justice. Isabella is counting on our cautiousness and our desire to avoid conflict. She believes we'll hesitate long enough for her to complete her takeover. A soft knock interrupted their conversation. Lady Catherine entered after being granted permission, her usually composed demeanor showing signs of stress. As the kingdom's chief advisor on social affairs, she had worked closely with Elena and had become both an ally and friend. Your Majesty, Lady Catherine said, bowing to the king before addressing the group. I bring urgent news. General Aldrich has been gathering select military units under the pretext of festival security. However, my sources indicate these units are being positioned to control key areas of the palace and capital city. The news confirmed their worst fears about Isabella's military preparations. She wasn't just planning to discredit Elena. She was preparing for a complete takeover backed by armed force. How many men does Aldrich command? Alexander asked. Approximately 200 elite guards, plus another 300 regular soldiers who believe they're following legitimate orders, Lady Catherine replied. However, Captain Morrison has been discreetly reaching out to unit commanders who aren't part of Aldrich's inner circle. Many of them have concerns about the unusual deployment orders. Elena felt a spark of hope. If Morrison could turn some of Aldrich's forces, the military balance might shift in their favor. There's more, Lady Catherine continued. The Valdres delegation arrived this morning with an unusually large security contingent. They claim it's ceremonial, but these men are clearly combat veterans. King Frederick's expression darkened. Isabella is bringing foreign soldiers onto our soil under diplomatic cover. This is no longer just treason, it's an invasion. The gravity of their situation was becoming increasingly clear. Isabella had moved beyond internal political maneuvering to actively collaborating with a foreign power to overthrow the legitimate monarchy. We need to warn the people, Elena said. If Isabella succeeds in seizing power with Valdres backing, our citizens will face occupation by a hostile foreign force. But we must be careful not to cause panic, Alexander cautioned. Mass unrest could play into Isabella's hands by justifying her emergency measures. King Frederick was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing their options. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of 30 years of leadership. We proceed with the festival as planned, but we prepare for multiple contingencies. Catherine, I need you to discreetly contact the ambassadors from neighboring kingdoms. They should understand what's happening here and be prepared to offer support if necessary. Of course, Your Majesty, Lady Catherine replied. Alexander, work with Captain Morrison to identify which military units can be trusted. We may need to rely on their loyalty if Isabella's forces move against us. Already underway, Father. The king turned to Elena with an expression of deep concern and affection. My dear, you will be the primary target of Isabella's initial attack. We must ensure your safety while maintaining the appearance that everything is normal. Elena understood the challenge. She needed to remain visible and accessible to avoid confirming Isabella's accusations, but she also needed protection against assassination or kidnapping attempts. I have an idea, Elena said. What if we use Isabella's own strategy against her? She's planning to make accusations during the festival when maximum attention is focused on the royal family. We could prepare our own dramatic revelation, turning her moment of triumph into her downfall. Alexander looked intrigued but concerned. It would require perfect timing and coordination. One mistake could be catastrophic. Everything we do from this point forward carries that risk, Elena replied. But this approach gives us the best chance of exposing the truth to the largest number of witnesses, including foreign dignitaries who can carry the story back to their own kingdoms. King Frederick nodded approvingly. Elena is right. Isabella is counting on controlling the narrative through careful timing and presentation. If we can seize that control at the crucial moment, her entire plan collapses. Lady Catherine stepped forward. I could arrange for certain documents to be presented during the ceremonial portion of the festival. As chief advisor, I have the authority to introduce matters of state during such events. What about the Valdres representatives? Alexander asked. They'll be expecting to play a role in Isabella's takeover. When it fails, they might react with violence. This was perhaps their greatest challenge. The foreign soldiers on palace grounds represented a wild card that could turn political maneuvering into actual warfare. We need to isolate them from Isabella before she makes her move, Elena suggested. If they believe they're supporting a legitimate transition of power, they might be confused enough by our counter-revelations to hesitate rather than act immediately. Or they might attack more aggressively to prevent their conspiracy from being exposed, Alexander countered. King Frederick raised a trembling hand to quiet the discussion. We cannot control every variable, but we can prepare for the most likely scenarios. The key is to move decisively once we begin. Half measures will only give our enemies time to recover and counterattack. As they continued planning, Elena became aware of footsteps in the corridor outside the king's chambers. The sound was too regular to be casual foot traffic, suggesting someone was listening at the door. She caught Alexander's eye and nodded toward the door. He understood immediately and moved silently to investigate. Elena continued talking as if nothing were happening, discussing festival logistics to maintain the appearance of normal conversation. Alexander reached the door and yanked it open suddenly. A young servant stumbled forward, clearly having been pressed against the wooden panel. Elena recognized him as one of the pages who often worked in Isabella's quarters. What are you doing here? Alexander demanded. The servant, barely 16 years old, looked terrified. Please, Your Highness, I was ordered to listen. Queen Isabella said she needed to know what you were planning. Elena felt a mixture of anger and pity for the frightened boy. Isabella was using children as spies, putting them at risk to serve her treacherous purposes. How long have you been listening? King Frederick asked, his voice carrying the authority of absolute monarchy. Since Lady Catherine arrived, Your Majesty. I heard everything about the poison and the festival plan. The implications were devastating. Isabella would now know that they were aware of her crimes and were planning their own counterattack. All element of surprise was lost. Alexander looked to his father for guidance. The king was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with a decision that could determine all their fates. Bring the boy inside and close the door, King Frederick finally ordered. We cannot let him leave to report what he's heard, but neither will we harm a child who was following orders from his employer. Elena approached the frightened servant with gentle authority. What is your name? Thomas, Your Highness. Thomas Whitmore. Thomas, you've heard things today that put you in great danger. Queen Isabella is not who she pretends to be, and the orders you've been following serve enemies of the kingdom. Do you understand? The boy nodded, tears beginning to form in his eyes. I never wanted to spy on anyone, Princess Elena. But my family owes money to Lord Blackwood's companies. Queen Isabella said she would help if I did what she asked. Elena's heart broke for the child. Isabella had exploited his family's desperation to turn him into an unwilling accomplice to treason. Thomas, King Frederick said kindly, would you like to help save the kingdom instead of helping destroy it? The boy looked up with surprise and growing hope. Yes, Your Majesty. How? You can return to Queen Isabella and tell her that we suspected nothing. Say that you heard us planning festival arrangements and discussing the king's health, but nothing more. Can you do that convincingly? Thomas straightened with newfound determination. Yes, sir. I can lie to her as well as I've been lying to you. Elena smiled despite the gravity of their situation. The child's courage was remarkable, and his willingness to switch sides might provide them with a crucial advantage. But, Thomas, Alexander added seriously, once you do this, you cannot change your mind. If Queen Isabella discovers your deception, she will not hesitate to harm you or your family. I understand, Your Highness. My father fought in the border wars to protect this kingdom. I won't help enemies destroy what he defended. As Thomas prepared to leave with his false report, Elena realized that their desperate situation had just gained an unexpected ally. The boys' intelligence from within Isabella's inner circle might provide exactly the edge they needed to turn the coming confrontation in their favor. The battle for Raven's Hollow Palace was about to enter its final phase, and the stakes had never been higher. The Harvest Festival morning arrived with an unusual intensity that seemed to permeate every corner of Raven's Hollow Palace. Princess Elena stood at her bedroom window watching as thousands of citizens gathered in the palace courtyard and surrounding grounds, unaware that their beloved monarchy was about to face its greatest crisis in generations. The festival, traditionally a celebration of the kingdom's prosperity and the crown's connection to its people, would instead become the stage for a dramatic confrontation between loyalty and treachery. Elena had barely slept, spending the night reviewing their plan with Alexander and their trusted allies. Every detail had been considered, every contingency prepared for, but she knew that once the day's events began unfolding, they would be at the mercy of forces beyond their complete control. Isabella's spy network, General Aldrich's military units, and the Valdres delegation created variables that could turn their carefully orchestrated counterattack into catastrophe. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Alexander entered, already dressed in his formal military uniform for the festival ceremonies. The deep navy fabric with gold braiding suited him perfectly, but Elena could see the tension in his shoulders and the concern in his gray eyes. Captain Morrison reports that Aldrich has positioned his men throughout the festival grounds, Alexander said quietly. They're claiming standard security protocols, but their positions suggest preparation for crowd control and potential conflict. Elena nodded grimly. Any word from Thomas about Isabella's plans? He managed to deliver our false information successfully. According to his report, Isabella believes we're unaware of her intentions. She's planning to make her accusations against you during the ceremonial presentation of the harvest tributes. The timing was significant. The tribute presentation was the festival's most formal moment, when representatives from across the kingdom would offer symbolic gifts to the crown while foreign dignitaries observed. It was also when the largest crowd would be gathered and media attention would be most intense. Perfect for maximum humiliation, Elena said bitterly. But also perfect for maximum exposure when we turn the tables, Alexander replied, moving to stand beside her at the window. Lady Catherine has arranged for the evidence against Isabella to be presented immediately after Isabella makes her accusations. The timing should create maximum dramatic impact. Elena studied the faces of the people gathering below. Families with children, elderly couples, young lovers, farmers and merchants and craftspeople, all trusting in the stability and protection that the monarchy represented. Their innocence made Isabella's betrayal even more heinous. They deserve to know the truth, Elena said. Whatever the cost to us personally. Alexander took her hand, intertwining their fingers. We'll face whatever comes together. Isabella has underestimated the strength of our bond and the loyalty of those who serve the crown with genuine hearts. A commotion in the courtyard below drew their attention. The Valdres delegation was arriving in formal procession, their ceremonial guards marching in precise formation. To untrained observers, they appeared to be standard diplomatic security, but Elena could see the way they moved and positioned themselves. These were combat soldiers disguised as ceremonial troops. How many do you count? Alexander asked. Elena studied the formation carefully. 50 visible guards, but there are likely more in civilian clothes among the delegation staff, plus whatever assets they might have positioned outside the palace grounds. The numbers were concerning, but not overwhelming if Captain Morrison had successfully turned portions of the regular palace guard. The key would be preventing the situation from escalating to violence while exposing Isabella's treachery. Lady Catherine appeared at the bedroom door with an expression of barely controlled urgency. Your Highnesses, we have a development. King Frederick is insisting on attending the festival ceremonies. Elena felt her heart skip. The king's physical condition remained precarious, and the stress of public appearance during such a crisis could be dangerous. But she also understood his reasoning. His presence would lend maximum authority to any revelations about Isabella's crimes. Is he strong enough? Alexander asked. The royal physician advised against it, but His Majesty was quite insistent. He says the kingdom needs to see their king standing strong against treachery. Alexander made his decision quickly. Then, we adjust our plan accordingly. Father's presence actually strengthens our position, but we need additional security around him. Captain Morrison is arranging that personally, Lady Catherine assured them. He selected guards whose loyalty to the crown is absolutely certain. As they finalized their preparations, Elena became aware of an unusual silence from the direction of Isabella's quarters. Throughout the morning, there had been constant activity as Isabella prepared for what she believed would be her moment of triumph. The sudden quiet was unnerving. Thomas should have reported back by now, Elena said. I'm concerned that something might have happened to him. Alexander's expression darkened. If Isabella discovered his deception, they were interrupted by a young maid rushing into the room with obvious distress. Your Highnesses, forgive the intrusion, but there's been an incident. The servant boy Thomas was found unconscious in the kitchen quarters. Elena's worst fears were confirmed. Isabella had somehow learned of Thomas's betrayal and acted accordingly. Is he alive? Yes, princess, but barely. Someone struck him severely about the head. He's been taken to the medical quarters. This changed everything. If Isabella knew that Thomas had been compromised, she would assume their entire plan had been exposed. She might accelerate her timeline or change her approach entirely. We need to move immediately, Alexander said. If Isabella suspects we know about her intentions, she might try to have Elena arrested before the ceremonies begin. Lady Catherine nodded grimly. I'll signal Captain Morrison to implement our emergency protocols. Your Highnesses should remain in secure areas until we understand the full scope of Isabella's response. Elena shook her head firmly. No. If I hide now, it confirms her accusations. We proceed exactly as planned, but with heightened awareness that Isabella knows we're prepared to resist. Elena, the danger has increased exponentially, Alexander argued. Isabella might resort to direct assassination rather than public accusations. Then, we face that risk together. The kingdom's future is more important than our personal safety. Alexander looked as if he wanted to continue arguing, but Lady Catherine's expression made it clear that time was running out. Their Highnesses are right, she said. Any deviation from normal behavior now will signal weakness and fear. We must proceed with confidence and strength. As they prepared to leave Elena's quarters, a palace guard arrived with an urgent message. Your Highnesses, Queen Isabella requests your immediate presence in the Great Hall. She says there are important matters to discuss before the festival ceremonies begin. Elena and Alexander exchanged knowing looks. Isabella was moving more quickly than anticipated, probably hoping to catch them off guard with an immediate confrontation. Tell Queen Isabella that we'll join her momentarily, Elena replied calmly. We're just finishing our preparations for the festival. The guard departed, and Elena turned to Alexander with determination. This is it. Whatever happens next will determine everything. Alexander nodded, his expression mixing love, concern, and resolve. Remember, no matter what accusations she makes, we have the evidence to prove her guilt. Stay strong, and let her condemn herself with her own words. They made their way through the palace corridors that had become so familiar during Elena's years as a princess. Each tapestry, each portrait, each architectural detail represented the heritage that Isabella was attempting to destroy for her own ambition. The Great Hall was already partially filled with early festival guests and palace staff making final preparations. Isabella stood near the throne dais, looking regal and composed in a stunning burgundy gown. Her expression was perfectly crafted to convey concern and reluctant duty. Alexander, Elena, thank you for coming so promptly, Isabella said as they approached. Her voice carried just the right note of sorrowful gravity. I'm afraid I have some very disturbing information that must be addressed before we can proceed with today's celebrations. Several foreign dignitaries and palace officials had gathered nearby, apparently at Isabella's invitation. Elena realized that Isabella was planning to make her accusations in front of witnesses who could spread the story throughout the diplomatic community. What sort of information? Alexander asked, his tone carefully neutral. Isabella gestured toward a table where several documents lay spread out. Financial irregularities that have come to my attention. It appears that significant amounts of money designated for charitable projects have been diverted to personal accounts. Elena forced herself to remain calm despite the fury building inside her. Isabella was proceeding exactly as they had anticipated, but the presence of witnesses made the situation more delicate. That's a serious accusation, Elena replied evenly. I trust you have substantial evidence to support such a claim. Unfortunately, I do. Isabella's expression conveyed perfect reluctance and sadness. Bank records showing transfers from royal accounts to private holdings. Correspondence suggesting these diversions were made in exchange for favorable treatment of certain business interests. The fabricated evidence was presented with professional competence. Anyone not aware of Isabella's true nature might find the accusations believable, especially given Elena's legitimate access to palace financial systems. These are grave charges, one of the foreign dignitaries observed. If true, they represent a serious breach of royal trust. Alexander stepped forward with controlled anger. If true. But accusations require more than convenient paperwork to be accepted as fact. Isabella's eyes flashed briefly before she regained her composure. I understand this is difficult to accept, Alexander. Elena is your wife, and you naturally want to believe in her innocence. But the evidence is quite conclusive. Is it? Elena asked calmly. May I examine these documents that supposedly prove my guilt? Isabella hesitated for just a moment, long enough for Elena to recognize uncertainty. Of course, though I should warn you that attempting to dispute clear evidence will only make your situation worse. Elena approached the table and examined the papers carefully. They were sophisticated forgeries, but she had spent enough time studying the real palace financial records to recognize the subtle inconsistencies. These bank account numbers, Elena said, pointing to specific entries. They don't follow the standard format used by the royal treasury. And this signature. She held up a document purporting to show her authorization of fund transfers. The handwriting is close, but not exact. Someone has studied my signature well enough to create passable forgeries, but not perfect ones. Murmurs began among the witnesses as Elena's confident analysis raised doubts about the evidence. Isabella's expression showed the first signs of concern. You would naturally claim forgery when faced with proof of your crimes, Isabella said, but her voice lacked its previous certainty. Would I? Elena replied. Then, perhaps we should examine all the financial records together. I'm sure you wouldn't object to complete transparency regarding royal expenditures. It was a direct challenge that put Isabella in an impossible position. Agreeing to full disclosure would expose her own crimes, but refusing would make her appear guilty of hiding something. Before Isabella could respond, King Frederick's voice echoed through the great hall. That sounds like an excellent idea. The king entered with slow dignity, supported by Captain Morrison and several loyal guards. His presence immediately shifted the balance of power in the room. Isabella's face went pale as she realized her timeline had been disrupted. Your Majesty, Isabella said, recovering quickly, you shouldn't be exerting yourself. These financial irregularities can be handled without troubling you. I think irregularities involving the royal treasury very much concern me. King Frederick replied with quiet authority. As do accusations of treason against my daughter-in-law. The king's use of such a strong term sent shockwaves through the assembled witnesses. Treason was a capital crime, and his willingness to use the word publicly suggested the situation was far more serious than Isabella had presented. Father, Alexander said, playing his part perfectly. If there are questions about palace financial management, perhaps we should examine all accounts thoroughly. Complete transparency will resolve any concerns. Isabella found herself trapped by her own accusations. She had expected to control the narrative through careful presentation of fabricated evidence, but the royal family's united response was forcing her into a position where the full truth might be revealed. Of course, she said finally, but we should focus on the specific evidence at hand rather than allowing emotional responses to cloud the facts. Elena saw her opportunity and took it. Emotional responses? You mean like a mother-in-law's grief at discovering financial corruption? Or perhaps like the anger of foreign business partners who've been promised favorable treatment in exchange for their support? The last comment was a calculated risk designed to probe Isabella's connections with Lord Blackwood and the Valdres delegation. Isabella's reaction, a momentary freeze followed by rapid blinking, confirmed that Elena had struck home. I don't understand what you're implying, Isabella said, but her voice had lost its confident tone. King Frederick stepped forward despite his physical weakness. Perhaps it's time we discussed exactly what we all understand about the current situation. The formal challenge was issued. Isabella would now be forced to either retreat from her accusations or escalate to a direct confrontation that would reveal the full scope of her treachery. As the witnesses watched with growing fascination and concern, the two sides prepared for a battle that would determine the kingdom's future. The festival celebrations continued outside, but inside the Great Hall, a drama was unfolding that would be remembered in the kingdom's history for generations to come. Elena stood beside Alexander and his father, ready to face whatever accusations Isabella might make, while knowing that they possessed the evidence to destroy their enemy completely. The moment of final confrontation was at hand. The The great hall fell into an electric silence as King Frederick's challenge hung in the air. Princess Elena could feel the weight of history pressing down upon this moment, knowing that the next few minutes would determine not only her fate, but the survival of the kingdom itself. Queen Isabella stood frozen, her carefully constructed facade beginning to crack under the pressure of unexpected resistance. "Your Majesty," Isabella said, attempting to regain control of the situation, "I believe we should handle these sensitive matters privately rather than in front of foreign guests." It was a desperate attempt to remove witnesses, but King Frederick was not to be deterred. "Transparency serves justice better than privacy serves conspiracy," he replied with the authority of 3 decades of wise rule. Alexander stepped forward, his military bearing commanding attention from everyone present. "Since we're discussing transparency, perhaps Queen Isabella would explain her recent correspondence with King Marcus of Valdres?" The question landed like a thunderbolt. Isabella's composure shattered completely as gasps echoed through the great hall. The foreign dignitaries exchanged alarmed glances, recognizing the implications of secret communications with a potentially hostile neighboring kingdom. "I have no idea what you're suggesting," Isabella said, but her voice betrayed her panic. Elena withdrew the photographs she had taken in Isabella's office, holding them up for all to see. "These documents suggest otherwise. Financial arrangements, territorial concessions, and promises of political cooperation, all in exchange for military support during a transition of power." The evidence was damning, and Isabella knew it. Her eyes darted toward the Valdres delegation, looking for support, but the foreign diplomats appeared as shocked as everyone else. They had been told they were supporting a legitimate political transition, not participating in a treasonous conspiracy. "Those documents are fabricated," Isabella declared, but without conviction. King Frederick reached beneath his formal robes and withdrew the sealed papers he had shown Elena and Alexander earlier. "Are these also fabricated?" He handed the documents to Captain Morrison. "Captain, please read the medical analysis aloud." Morrison's weathered voice carried clearly through the hall as he read the laboratory report detailing the slow-acting poison found in the king's system. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Attempted regicide was the most serious crime imaginable, carrying implications that went far beyond political maneuvering. Isabella's face went completely white. "That's impossible. Frederick, you can't believe I would ever." "The evidence speaks for itself," the king replied sadly. "The poison, the financial corruption, the foreign conspiracy, all documented and verified." Lord Blackwood, who had been watching from the edge of the crowd, began moving toward the hall's exit. Elena caught sight of his retreat and called out, "Captain Morrison, Lord Blackwood appears to be leaving. Perhaps he should remain to answer questions about his mining investments and land acquisition activities." Morrison's guards immediately moved to intercept Blackwood, who found himself surrounded before he could reach the doors. His capture sent another wave of understanding through the witnesses as they realized the scope of the conspiracy they were witnessing. Isabella, seeing her primary ally captured, made a desperate final gambit. "Even if these accusations were true," she said, "the kingdom needs strong leadership. Frederick is dying, Alexander is inexperienced, and Elena is a foreign-born princess with no understanding of our people's needs." It was a complete abandonment of subtlety, a direct challenge to the legitimate monarchy. Alexander's response was immediate and devastating. "Foreign-born." Alexander's voice carried dangerous calm. "Elena has spent 3 years learning our language, studying our history, and working directly with citizens in hospitals, schools, and farming communities. Meanwhile, you've been stealing from those same institutions to fund your personal ambitions. And as for inexperience," Elena added, "I wonder if collaborating with enemy kingdoms and poisoning family members represents the kind of experience our people require." Isabella's supporters among the palace staff and minor nobles began stepping away from her, recognizing that association with attempted regicide would destroy their own positions and possibly their lives. The isolation was visible and devastating. General Aldrich chose that moment to enter the Great Hall with a contingent of his loyal soldiers. Elena's heart sank as she realized Isabella still had military support that could turn this confrontation violent. "Your Majesty," Aldrich said, addressing King Frederick, but glancing meaningfully at Isabella, "I've received reports of civil disturbance that require immediate attention." It was clearly a prepared statement designed to justify military intervention. Alexander stepped forward to meet this new threat, but Before he could speak, another voice rang out from the hall's entrance. "General Aldrich, your services are no longer required." Captain Morrison entered with a much larger force of palace guards, their loyalty clearly demonstrated by their willingness to stand against Aldrich's troops. The two military forces faced each other across the Great Hall, while civilians scrambled for safety. "Captain Morrison," Aldrich said carefully, "you're exceeding your authority." "I'm following the direct orders of King Frederick," Morrison replied, producing a written command bearing the royal seal. "You and your co-conspirators are under arrest for treason, attempted regicide, and collaboration with foreign enemies." The standoff was tense and potentially explosive, but Elena noticed something that gave her hope. Many of Aldrich's soldiers appeared confused and uncertain. They had been told they were maintaining order during a legitimate political transition, not supporting a treasonous coup. Elena stepped forward, addressing Aldrich's troops directly. "Soldiers of the crown, you've served our kingdom with honor and loyalty. The question now is whether that loyalty extends to foreign kings and poisoners, or to the rightful monarchy you swore to protect." Her words had immediate effect. Several of Aldrich's soldiers lowered their weapons and stepped away from their commander. The general's face showed growing desperation as he realized his military support was crumbling. "Stand firm," Aldrich commanded, but his voice lacked conviction. More soldiers defected, until only a core group of perhaps 20 men remained loyal to the traitorous general. The Valdres delegation, seeing their conspiracy exposed and their military support evaporating, began their own desperate calculations. Their leader, a man Elena recognized as Duke Marchand, stepped forward with diplomatic urgency. "Your Majesty," Duke Marchand addressed King Frederick, "I want to make clear that the Kingdom of Valdres had no knowledge of any criminal activities. We were told this was a legitimate political transition requested by your family. It was a desperate attempt to avoid international consequences, but Elena wasn't inclined toward mercy for those who had brought foreign soldiers onto their soil." "Your ignorance seems remarkably selective," Elena replied coldly. "Did you not question why you were asked to bring combat troops disguised as ceremonial guards?" Duke Marchand's silence confirmed what everyone suspected. Valdres had known exactly what they were supporting and had gambled on a successful coup that would expand their influence. Now they faced the consequences of backing the losing side. Isabella, seeing her final allies abandoning her cause, made one last desperate attempt to salvage something from her failed conspiracy. "You may have won today," she said to Elena, "but the people will never fully accept you. You'll always be the foreign princess who brought conflict to their peaceful kingdom." Elena's response surprised everyone, including Isabella. Instead of anger or defensive arguments, Elena laughed, a sound of genuine amusement that echoed through the great hall. "Isabella, you've been so focused on what you thought were my weaknesses that you never recognized my actual strengths. I am foreign-born, and that gives me perspective you lack. I've seen how other kingdoms treat their people, and I know how much better we can do. I am young and inexperienced in palace intrigue, which means I haven't learned to accept corruption as normal." Elena's confidence and clarity impressed even her opponents. She continued, "Most importantly, I love this kingdom and its people enough to risk everything defending them from those who would exploit them. Can you say the same?" Isabella had no answer. Her motivations had been entirely selfish, driven by ambition and greed rather than any genuine care for the kingdom's welfare. The contrast with Elena's obvious dedication was stark and damning. King Frederick, despite his physical weakness, managed to stand straighter as he delivered the final judgment. "Isabella of House Rothenburg, you are hereby stripped of all titles and honors. You will be confined pending trial for treason, attempted regicide, financial corruption, and collaboration with foreign enemies. General Aldrich and Lord Blackwood face similar charges." The formal pronouncement marked the end of the conspiracy that had threatened to destroy the kingdom. Isabella's supporters were arrested or fled, while the Valdres delegation found themselves under diplomatic detention pending negotiations about their future relationship with the kingdom. As the immediate crisis passed, Elena became aware of sounds from outside the palace. The harvest festival was continuing, with citizens still celebrating in the courtyards and grounds. They remained largely unaware of how close their kingdom had come to foreign occupation and tyrannical rule. Alexander approached Elena with a mixture of relief, pride, and exhaustion. "It's over," he said softly. "This part is over," Elena corrected. "Now we have to rebuild trust, implement real reforms, and ensure this never happens again." King Frederick, supported by loyal guards, managed a weak smile. The kingdom is fortunate to have such a dedicated princess, and such a strong prince who was willing to defend what was right regardless of personal cost. Elena took Alexander's hand, feeling the weight of responsibility and opportunity that lay ahead. They had protected the kingdom from immediate danger, but the harder work of governing wisely and justly was just beginning. Outside, the festival continued as citizens celebrated their kingdom's prosperity, unaware that their princess and prince had just fought and won a battle for the very soul of their nation. The music and laughter served as a reminder of what they had fought to preserve, not just political power, but the joy and security that good governance could provide to ordinary people. As the prisoners were led away and the foreign delegation was escorted to secure quarters, Elena reflected on the lessons of the past few days. Evil often disguised itself as righteousness, corruption presented itself as efficiency, and betrayal claimed to serve higher purposes. But truth, courage, and genuine love for justice could prevail when good people were willing to stand together and fight for what was right. The kingdom had been tested and had emerged stronger. Princess Elena had proven herself not just as Alexander's wife, but as a true defender of the crown and protector of the people. The future remained uncertain, as futures always do, but it would be faced by leaders who had demonstrated their willingness to sacrifice for the common good. The harvest festival concluded that evening with fireworks lighting up the palace grounds, a fitting celebration of the kingdom's deliverance from those who would have destroyed it from within. Elena and Alexander watched from the palace balcony, knowing that they had earned the right to enjoy the peace and prosperity they had fought so hard to preserve.